Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're grabbing a magnifying glass and zooming in on a really specific, highly volatile slice of history. We're going to break down the complex political, historical, and military factors that collided to create an absolute perfect storm in the South Atlantic. The 1982 conflict over the Falkland Islands, or as they're known in Argentina, Las Malvinas.
Just 74 days. That's literally all it took. In a little over 10 weeks, this remote archipelago completely transformed into the stage for a massive geopolitical crisis that permanently altered the trajectory of two nations. It was an intense, highly modern, and totally undeclared war.
So it really begs our central question for this explainer. Why did a centuries-old dispute suddenly explode into a modern war in 1982? Think about it. If these two nations have been arguing about this exact territory for generations, what was the specific spark that finally made the powder keg detonate that year?
First up, the sovereignty dispute itself.
To figure out why that spark caught fire, we've got to understand the powder keg, right? We need to neutrally lay out these deep-rooted territorial claims, because it's like a giant historical puzzle. On the Argentine side, their claim to Las Malvinas goes way back to the early 19th century. They argue that when they gained independence, they basically inherited the islands from the Spanish Empire. So from their point of view, British rule is an illegal colonial occupation of their land. On the flip side, the United Kingdom says, hold on, we've officially administered the Falkland Islands continuously since 1833. Plus, their claim leans heavily on the modern principle of self-determination. They point out that the island's residents were of British descent and actively wanted to remain British.
So, let's get into exactly why the war broke out.
Okay, we've got two competing historical claims. But a disagreement over history doesn't automatically mean you start shooting, right? What was the catalyst in 1982? Well, it was a literal perfect storm of domestic politics. Down in Argentina, the country was ruled by a military dictatorship, a junta, led by General Leopoldo Galtieri. And man, this government was deeply unpopular. The economy was tanking, civil unrest was everywhere, and they were absolutely desperate for a way to trigger some nationalist pride and unite the public. Now, contrast that with Britain. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's government was actually busy planning major defense cuts, and crucially, this included pulling their only South Atlantic patrol ship, the HMS Endurance.
And that right there led to a massive psychological miscalculation. General Galtieri's junta looked at those defense cuts, they saw the ship being withdrawn, and they read it as a clear sign that Britain was weak, distracted, and just unwilling to fight for some remote territory. They honestly thought they could swoop in for a swift, uncontested victory and solve all their domestic problems in one go.
Which brings us to the 74-day conflict. Well, the invasion happened, and the British reaction was, actually scratch that, it was the exact opposite of weak. Despite the junta's assumptions, Britain immediately mobilized a massive naval task force. But they had to project that military power over a distance of roughly 8,000 miles. It's staggering when you think about the logistical nightmare of moving an entire fleet, troops, and supplies across that kind of ocean on a moment's notice.
But, the logistical extremity really pales in comparison to the human cost of this short war. In just 10 weeks, 907 lives were lost. That includes 649 Argentinian military personnel, 255 British servicemen, and 3 Falkland Island civilians. The timeline here is just whiplash. It kicks off April 2nd when Argentine forces officially invade. The British task force arrives, and by May, things escalate drastically out on the water, most notably with the sinking of the Argentine cruiser, the General Belgrano. By late May, British troops established a beachhead with an amphibious landing at San Carlos. And finally, after weeks of really harsh combat, it ends on June 14th with the Argentine surrender, handing the territory back to British control.
Looking back, this conflict was a terrifying template for modern, multi-domain warfare. Like we just mentioned, a British nuclear submarine torpedoed the General Belgrano, which tragically killed 323 Argentinian sailors, and basically kept the rest of the Argentine Navy in port. Up in the air, Argentine pilots showed incredible skill using French-made Exocet anti-ship missiles, doing severe damage and sinking warships like the HMS Sheffield. And on land, following the San Carlos landing, soldiers fought these brutal, close-quarters ground battles in literally freezing, wind-swept, unforgiving terrain. The Battle of Goose Green is a prime example.
Let's look at the aftermath and the political fallout.
When the guns finally fell silent, the political landscapes of both nations were permanently flipped, but in totally opposite directions.
In Argentina, this humiliating defeat completely shattered whatever credibility the junta had left. The war they started to save themselves actually led directly to their total collapse, which paved the way for the restoration of democracy in 1983. Meanwhile, over in Britain, it was a totally different story. The victory unleashed this massive wave of patriotic sentiment across the UK. It completely revived Margaret Thatcher's dwindling popularity and propelled her to a huge landslide electoral victory, also in 1983.
Which leaves us looking at the flashpoint today.
So did the war actually solve the underlying dispute? The short answer is absolutely not. This isn't just dusty history. The diplomatic rift is highly active right now. Let's look at some modern data. In 2013, the islanders held a referendum to clarify their status. Exercising that principle of self-determination we talked about earlier, a staggering 99.8% of the residents voted to remain a British overseas territory. Basically, everyone.
But despite the 1982 war, and despite those overwhelmingly clear 2013 referendum results, the reality on the ground is that Argentina still constitutionally claims the islands as their sovereign territory. Because of this, the issue just keeps resurfacing. It's a major flashpoint in South American and European politics, diplomatic relations, and it even bubbles up during international sports tournaments. Which leaves us with this lingering question. With Argentina's constitutional claims still fully active, and Britain remaining totally firm on the islanders' self-determination, will this centuries-old dispute ever actually be resolved? Or are we just looking at a permanent geopolitical stalemate? It's a fascinating, complex reality that shows exactly how fast political miscalculations can ignite long-standing tensions, and how the echoes of a 74-day war can literally last for generations. Thanks so much for watching The Explainer. We'll see you next time.